10 rock bands, one thing in common, each lost a single person, and the band that came out the other side was never the same. Sometimes that's tragedy. Sometimes it's a phone call nobody saw coming. And sometimes it's actually better, which is a harder thing to admit than it sounds.
200 degrees, that's why they call me Mr. Fahrenheit.
10. INXS.
Some silken moment.
Michael Hutchence had one of those voices and one of those faces that made INXS feel less like a band and more like a movement.
To make every moment come alive. All those stars.
Their 1987 album Kick turned them into global superstars, and Need You Tonight became their only song ever to hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100.
Every moment come alive. All those stars that shine.
Knocking Michael Jackson off the top spot in January 1988. That's how big this band actually got. And if you were watching MTV in the fall of 1997 when the news broke, you remember exactly where you were.
As your beauty, I see your face.
On November 22, 1997, Hutchence was found hanging in a Sydney hotel room, hours before INXS was set to leave on their 20th anniversary tour. The coroner ruled it suicide, tied to depression and substance use. His girlfriend, Paula Yates, later suggested it might have instead been autoerotic asphyxiation. And the debate over how exactly he died sometimes overshadowed the fact that a genuinely brilliant frontman was just gone, at 37, in the middle of what should have been a victory lap. INXS didn't quietly fade out. Years later, they held an actual reality television competition, Rockstar INXS, to publicly audition a new singer in front of millions of viewers. Contestants performed INXS songs for a panel that included the surviving band members, week after week, until they crowned a winner, a Canadian singer named J.D. Fortune, live on television.
I will survive.
Think about that, a band searching for its dead frontman's replacement as a game show. If you've ever tried to keep something alive out of loyalty, long after the person who made it matter wasn't there anymore, you know that particular kind of exhaustion. 9. The Doors. Jim Morrison wasn't just the singer of The Doors. He was, depending who you ask, either the greatest rock poet of his generation or a walking liability the other three members spent years managing, probably both. On July 3, 1971, he was found dead in a bathtub in Paris. He was 27. Here's what almost nobody remembers, because it's genuinely bizarre. The Doors didn't stop. Ray Manzarek, Robbie Krieger, and John Densmore went right back into the rehearsal space and recorded 2 more albums as a trio. Other voices and Full Circle, with Manzarek and Krieger splitting lead vocal duties between them. No replacement singer, just whoever was standing closest to the mic. Other voices actually cracked the top 40, landing at number 31, a modest showing, all things considered. But Full Circle barely limped to number 68, and its single, The Mosquito, stalled at 85. It was the last Doors song to ever chart the band itself, eventually seemed almost embarrassed by these records. For decades, they didn't even bother putting them on CD. No reissue, no push, barely an acknowledgement they existed. Like the surviving members quietly agreed the experiment hadn't worked, and it was better left buried. It took until 2011 for those two albums to finally get an official digital release. Both albums flopped harder with every passing year in the band's own estimation. And critics weren't rejecting bad songwriting, they were rejecting the idea that the Doors could exist without the person who made them dangerous in the first place. And here's the truth under all of it. Sometimes you can keep the name, keep the sound, keep the musicians, and it still isn't the thing anymore. Because the thing was never really the sound, it was the person standing in front of it. The Doors quietly stopped trying by 1973. Some bands get that lesson slowly and painfully, others learn it fast.
Let's look at the numbers. Only 9% of you are actually subscribed. Honestly, that's tough to see. Our team spends days hunting down archives and verifying every single fact just to tell these stories right. If you've made it this far into the video, you're clearly part of the community, so please hit subscribe. It costs nothing and helps us immensely. Now, for those already subscribed, very few of you have made the jump to our membership, and that's a hard pill to swallow because you're the ones who know our value best. If this channel has moved you or inspired you, consider joining. It's the price of one coffee, but it's the literal fuel for this channel. Let's keep this alive together. Back to the story.
Lynyrd Skynyrd. Ronnie Van Zant built Lynyrd Skynyrd's entire identity, that southern rock swagger, Sweet Home Alabama, Freebird, as both frontman and de facto band leader. On October 17, 1977, they released their fifth album, Street Survivors. Three days later, their chartered plane ran out of fuel and crashed into a Mississippi swamp outside a tiny town called Gillsburg. Van Zant died, so did guitarist Steve Gaines and his sister, backing vocalist Cassie Gaines, along with the pilots and the band's assistant road manager. Here's what that still gives people chills. The original cover of Street Survivors pictured the whole band standing on a city street, engulfed in flames, a stylistic choice, nothing more, made months before the crash. After 3 members died in a fiery plane wreck, MCA Records pulled that cover within days, out of respect for the families, and quietly replaced it with a plain black background. It's the kind of coincidence that sounds invented, and it wasn't. Here's what most people don't know beyond that. The surviving members didn't tour, didn't record, didn't perform as Lynyrd Skynyrd again, for a full decade, out of respect, out of grief, out of the simple fact that there was no version of that band that made sense without him. Meanwhile, ironically, in the wake of the tragedy, Street Survivors became the band's highest charting album ever, hitting number 5, the exact opposite of what any of them would have wanted that record to be remembered for. When they finally did reform in 1987, they didn't try to replace Ronnie Van Zant with a sound-alike either. They brought in his younger brother, Johnny Van Zant, to sing, which is either the most fitting tribute in rock history or the strangest, depending how you look at it. Maybe both. And if you've ever watched a family, literal or musical, try to figure out how to keep going after losing the person who was supposed to be irreplaceable, you know it never looks like anyone expected it to. It usually looks like this: messy, overdue, and done out of love instead of ambition. Seven, The Who. Keith Moon didn't just play drums for The Who. He was chaos with a drum kit attached. Hotel rooms destroyed, drum kits exploding on live television, a personality so enormous it became half the band's whole mythology. In August 1978, the band released Who Are You?, their 8th studio album, which peaked at number 2 on the Billboard 200, their highest charting record. And here's a detail that still gives people chills. On the album cover, Moon is photographed sitting on a chair with the words, "Not to be taken away," stenciled right on the back of it. Just a random studio prop, nothing symbolic intended at the time. Three weeks later, on September 7, 1978, Moon died in his sleep from an overdose of heminevrin, a prescription drug meant to help him fight alcohol withdrawal. The thing meant to save him from one addiction is what killed him instead. And that chair, on an album cover that had already shipped to stores, suddenly read like a warning nobody had noticed in time. Sit with that irony for a second, because it's brutal. The Who brought in Kenny Jones, formerly of Small Faces, a genuinely great drummer in his own right. And here's the controversy, because I know some of you are going to disagree with me. It never quite worked. Not because Jones wasn't skilled, he was, but because Moon's playing was so unpredictable, so alive, that anyone technically correct behind that kit was always going to feel like a downgrade by comparison. Some fans will fight me on that. I'd argue the numbers back me up. The Who's most celebrated studio work basically ends with Moon. Decades later, Zach Starkey, Ringo Starr's son, and Keith Moon's actual godson, became the band's long-term touring drummer. There's something almost too poetic about that connection existing at all. If you've ever watched a band search for years for something that was never really replaceable, only approximate, you already know how that story usually ends. Six AC/DC. Bon Scott was AC/DC's original voice. Raw, gravelly, dangerous in a way that felt genuinely unpredictable, not manufactured. On February 19, 1980, after a night of heavy drinking in a London pub, he passed out in a friend's car and never woke up, choking in his sleep. He was 33. The band seriously considered walking away entirely. Angus Young later said it felt like losing a member of your own family. But barely a week after the funeral, they started rehearsing again anyway. Not because the grief was gone, but because, as Malcolm Young put it, they weren't going to just sit around moping for a year. Here's what nobody expects. When they auditioned singers, they landed on Brian Johnson, a working-class guy from Newcastle fronting a mostly unknown band called Geordie. And it turned out Bon Scott himself had seen Johnson perform years earlier and had personally raved about him to the band. In a strange way, Bon picked his own replacement without ever knowing it. They flew to the Bahamas that spring, grieving and terrified, and recorded Back in Black in about 6 weeks. The cover was stripped down to plain black as a mark of mourning, and the album opens with a tolling funeral bell before the guitar riff even hits. The most famous intro in hard rock, built as a tribute nobody was allowed to call a tribute out loud. Five, Genesis. Peter Gabriel was Genesis in the early 70s. The foxhead masks, the flower costumes, the theatrical concept albums, nobody else in prog rock was brave enough to attempt. After touring behind The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway in 1975, exhausted and pulled toward his family after a difficult birth for his daughter, Gabriel quit. Here's the part that sounds made up but isn't. The band didn't announce it publicly right away. Instead, they placed an anonymous ad in Melody Maker that just said they were looking for a singer for a Genesis-type group, not even using their own name. Hundreds of people responded. The band ended up listening to roughly 400 audition tapes from total strangers, trying to find someone who could become the new voice of Genesis. None of them fit. At one point, the band seriously discussed just releasing the next album as an instrumental record, with no vocals at all, because nobody they'd heard sounded right. The whole time this was happening, drummer Phil Collins had been in the room coaching every single one of those candidates, demonstrating the vocal parts so they'd know how the songs were supposed to sound. He wasn't auditioning, he was just showing people how to do it. And eventually, the rest of the band looked at each other and realized the guy teaching everyone else the songs was already doing it better than anyone walking through the door. He wasn't the plan. He was what was left when the plan didn't work. And by his own account, he didn't even want the job.
Can't you feel my heart?
I didn't want him to leave, Collins said years later. I just took over because someone had to. And you know what happened next. Genesis became a completely different band, glossier, more radio-friendly, eventually one of the biggest pop acts of the 80s, with Invisible Touch. Some longtime fans call that a betrayal of what the band used to be. I'd argue it's one of the strangest, most successful accidents in rock history. A reluctant drummer nobody auditioned becoming bigger than the frontman he replaced. Some of y'all already have an opinion on that, and I already know the comments are going to be split. 4. Black Sabbath. Ozzy Osbourne didn't leave Black Sabbath. He was fired in 1979 after years of substance abuse had made him increasingly unreliable in the studio and on stage. Tony Iommi, the guitarist, made the call himself. The band brought in Ronnie James Dio, fresh off leaving Rainbow, and their first album together, Heaven and Hell, released in April 1980, became a commercial success. Reaching number 28 on the Billboard 200 and eventually going silver in the band's home country. Not bad for a band everyone assumed was finished.
All these people know. Oh, Lord, yeah.
But here's the reveal. It wasn't a smooth transition at all. Playing shows on that first tour, Dio would walk out to crowds who were literally chanting Ozzy at him, night after night, before he'd won any of them over. Iommi later admitted it was genuinely difficult for Dio to stand in the exact spot where fans had watched Ozzy for 10 straight years. That takes a specific kind of nerve most singers wouldn't survive. And here's a detail almost nobody talks about. The drummer changed too, mid-tour. Bill Ward, the original drummer, walked away partway through for personal reasons, and Vinny Appice stepped in to finish it. So the same band that recorded the follow-up, Mob Rules, in 1981, wasn't just missing Ozzy. It had already quietly lost half its original engine room before that entire era even finished. Neither Dio nor Appice would appear on another Black Sabbath studio album for over a decade, not until 1992's Dehumanizer. Rolling Stone said at the time that Dio could sing circles around Ozzy technically, but that Sabbath would never be the same band again. They were right. And here's what's interesting. It wasn't worse. It was a genuinely different band, wearing a familiar name, and it brought them a younger audience that kept Sabbath's whole legacy alive into the 80s, influencing a generation of musicians who came up right behind them. If you've ever watched something you loved get rebuilt by someone you didn't choose, and then had to admit, grudgingly, that the rebuild actually worked, you know that specific discomfort. It doesn't feel like betrayal exactly. It just feels strange. The way home feels strange after someone rearranges the furniture, and you can't quite say it's wrong. Three, Van Halen. David Lee Roth was Van Halen. The leather pants, the kicks, the showmanship that made Eddie Van Halen's guitar playing feel like it belonged in a circus tent instead of a garage. In April 1985, after years of creative friction with Eddie later joked Roth was suffering from lead singer disease. Roth quit to chase a solo career, releasing a covers EP called Crazy from the Heat that actually went platinum right out of the gate. The label panicked. Executives reportedly floated the idea of dropping the Van Halen name entirely, or rotating a cast of guest singers instead of hiring one permanent frontman. Pop singer Patti Smythe was even approached about the job. For months, nobody knew what Van Halen was going to become, or whether it would exist at all. And then, almost by accident, a mechanic working on Eddie's Lamborghini happened to also service Sammy Hagar's car, and mentioned Hagar might be looking for a gig. That's it. That's the entire chain of events that created Van Hagar. Hagar came by Eddie's home studio in July 1985 to jam, and inside 20 minutes the two of them had written a complete song together. We all freaked out, Eddie said later. Here's the fact that should genuinely stop you. Their first album with Hagar, 5150, released in March 1986, became Van Halen's first ever #1 album on the Billboard 200. Not 1984, not Diver Down, not any Roth-era record. Their previous album, 1984, had peaked at #2, held off the top spot only by Michael Jackson's Thriller. Their absolute commercial peak, in terms of chart position, happened after the guy everyone thought was Van Halen walked out the door. And that's the recognition moment I want to leave you with here. Some of you already knew that stat and have been waiting the whole video for me to say it. Others are hearing it for the first time and rethinking everything you assumed about that band. Either way, drop your reaction in the comments, because Van Hagar versus Diamond Dave might be the longest running argument in rock fandom, and something tells me it's never actually getting settled. 2. Queen. Freddie Mercury was Queen in every sense that matters. The range, the theatrics, the songwriting instincts that could turn an operatic fake rock ballad into the most recognizable single of the 20th century. Here's what most people don't know. Mercury was diagnosed with AIDS in 1987, and he kept it almost entirely private for years, continuing to write and record with the band even as his health declined. By 1990, when the band was recording The Show Must Go On, Brian May genuinely doubted Mercury could physically sing it. The song demanded soaring high notes so brutal May couldn't even demo them in full voice himself. He told Freddie he didn't have to push through it. Freddie's response was to pour himself a shot of vodka, say, "I'll fucking do it, darling," walk into the booth propped against the mixing desk, because he could barely stand, and nail the vocal in a handful of takes.
Hey, hey, hey! Don't stop me, don't stop me. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Don't stop me.
May would later call it one of the finest performances of Mercury's entire career. By the time they filmed the video for These Are the Days of Our Lives in 1991, Mercury was visibly, painfully thin, and the band deliberately shot it in black and white to soften how sick he looked to the public.
I'm out of control. I'm a sex machine ready to reload.
He still insisted on finishing it. He announced his diagnosis publicly on November 23, 1991. He died the next day.
I'm traveling at the speed of light. I'm gonna make a supersonic woman of you.
And here's the part that gets me every time. He kept working, kept singing, kept giving everything to a band and an audience that mostly didn't know what he was fighting, right up until there was nothing left to give. That's not a career detail. That's the kind of devotion most of us will never fully understand, choosing again and again to hand over one more perfect take instead of resting. If this is the song that hit you hardest on this whole list, you're not alone. Some of you already know exactly which line in The Show Must Go On gets you every single time.
I'm having a ball. Don't stop me now.
1. Led Zeppelin.
Way, way down inside, I'm gonna give you my
John Bonham wasn't just Led Zeppelin's drummer. Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, and John Paul Jones all said, at different points and in different ways, the exact same thing. Without Bonham's timing, his sheer physical power behind the kit, there was no Led Zeppelin sound. Plant put it bluntly, take Bonzo's drumming away, and the band would sound useless. On September 24, 1980, the band gathered to rehearse for their first North American tour in 3 years, set to kick off in Montreal a few weeks later. Bonham had breakfast that morning with the band's assistant and started drinking. By the time rehearsal wrapped, he'd reportedly consumed something like 40 measures of vodka over roughly 24 hours. He was put to bed on a sofa to sleep it off. He never woke up. On September 25, 1980, he was found dead. He'd choked on his own vomit in his sleep. A coroner later ruling it accidental. He was 32. And here's why this one closes the list, and why it's different from every single band before it. Led Zeppelin didn't audition a replacement. They didn't tour with someone new behind the kit and hope fans adjusted. On December 4th, 1980, a little over 2 months after Bonham's funeral, the 3 remaining members released a short, carefully worded statement. We wish it to be known that the loss of our dear friend and the deep sense of undivided harmony felt by ourselves and our manager have led us to decide that we could not continue as we were, and they meant it. They didn't just retire the name for a while, they ended the band, permanently, that same year, the biggest rock band on the planet, at the absolute height of its power, choosing to stop rather than replace one person. Every other band on this list found some way to keep going. A new singer, a new drummer, a reinvention, a reunion decades later. Led Zeppelin looked at what they'd lost and decided the honest answer was that it couldn't be replaced, so they wouldn't insult it by trying. And if you've ever lost someone and understood, immediately, that no substitute could ever fill that specific space in your life, you already know exactly what that decision cost them, and exactly why they made it anyway.